Hello folks, welcome to this tutorial video on testing GET API request with Playwright TypeScript. In this video, you will learn how to install and set up Playwright with TypeScript, how to send a GET API request with Playwright TypeScript with single and multiple parameters, with headers, with timeout, using failOnStatusCode option. We will also learn about different ways to verify response data, including verifying the status code, verifying the response structure, performing basic level data verification, verifying the response in details, matching the object and array in the response, extracting the data from the response body, and using best practices to verify the response data. We will also check how to attach the response data to the Playwright report, which will be helpful in reading a comprehensive report of the test execution. So let's begin with installing Playwright with TypeScript. Let's first create a new folder and name it as ts-playwright. Let's change and move to this folder ts-playwright. Here we need to install the Playwright. So for doing that, we will run the command npm init playwright @latest and press the enter key. Once you press the enter key, you see a prompt coming up and asking us what do you want to use, TypeScript or JavaScript. So we will select TypeScript. You just need to use the arrow keys and press enter key to select the required option. Where do you want to put the test? So I will update it as the test folder. Add a GitHub Actions workflow. Yes, I need that. Install Playwright browsers. That can be done manually via npx playwright install. So we'll install it in this step itself. So let's give it as true. Press enter, and you can see the Playwright is getting installed now. And with this, the Playwright is installed successfully. After the Playwright installation is complete, let's open the same project in the VS Code, which is what I have done here. You can see it on my screen. This is the same folder that I created to install Playwright. And once I ran all the Playwright installation command with the respective prompts and answered all the respective questions, this is what it gets generated automatically. I can see the Playwright YAML file getting generated successfully for the CI. The node modules are there. I have the example test as well created by Playwright. There's a package.json file which can be verified for the Playwright dependency versions and the TypeScript version as well. We can have also verify the Playwright config TypeScript file. So this is how the npm command easily generates the Playwright TypeScript project for us. What I'll do is I'll just comment out this two because I don't need these two. I can just run the project on a Chromium version only and save this TypeScript file. I have already created one project in the folder Playwright TS API testing. You can verify the name here. It's available on GitHub as well. So if you want to check out the code, you can clone the repository from GitHub and run the test on your local machine as well. Before we begin with the GET API request testing with Playwright, let me first tell you about the demo application that I will be using throughout this tutorial. It is a RESTful e-commerce demo application which is available on the GitHub. You can just check it out, the project, by clicking on the repository RESTful-e-commerce here on the GitHub. It is a free to use e-commerce web APIs for practicing the API testing. So there are multiple ways to begin this application. To start this application, ideally, I'll be using Docker Compose. So I have the Docker Compose file already available in this project repository. And I'll just run the Docker Compose command to start the application. Docker Compose -f. You can see the file name is Docker Compose -ecommerce.yaml. I'll just run the command Docker Compose -f and start this application in the detached mode. So the container is up and running. I can just navigate to the Swagger and navigate to this URL localhost colon 3004/API docs, API-docs. So the application is now started. Before we start with the get order request verification using Playwright, let's first add some order details in the application so we get those response in the get API test. So for that, I have already added one test data folder in the same repository in the project, and there's an orders.json file here. We'll just copy this single file which contains an array of order. There's a single order here with all the details that are required. And let me click on try it out and paste these details here and then click on execute. So we can see, sorry, we can see there is one order generated successfully. It says orders added successfully and the order details are as follows. So now if I quickly run the get order, and we can see order ID is 1 here. So let me try this out by fetching the get order with the ID 1, and I expect that to return one order with the order ID 1, the same order details that we just posted using the post API. Now let's move to the test. The test, I have updated it in the test folder and named it as get-api-test.spec.ts. So there are multiple tests here currently. We will understand each and every test case one by one in details. So first, let's start with how to post a get request and verify the status code. We will also use the parameter here so we get the respective order that we want in the response. And it's just a basic check like expecting status code to be 200. So this is the test we will run just now. So before I execute this test, let me explain this in detail. It is a get order details API test where we perform some get status code check as well. This test calls the get order API and passes a user ID as a query parameter and verifies that the API responds with a status code 200. Fine. So this test, it defines a Playwright test case. The string that you see here, get order details API test with status code check, it is shown in the report when we run the test. The Playwright has an inbuilt report which we generated by using the command npx space playwright space show hyphen report. So once we generate that report, this particular text will be displayed in that report, denoting that this is the test that we ran. The async request, this part, it uses the fixture injection. The fixture name is request, and it's a Playwright's built-in API request context that is used to make HTTP calls. This part, the response const response equal to await request.get and the URL for the get API. This line sends an HTTP get request to the /get order endpoint. This is the endpoint where the request is sent. Await actually pauses the execution until the API responds, and the result is stored in the response variable, which is API response object. The parameters, this parameter part, it adds a query parameter user underscore ID that is 1. So once this request is sent, there is an expect. So it's actually performing the assertion. The response dot status, this part retrieves the HTTP status code returned by the API, and the expect asserts that the API responded successfully, and this is what the status code is checked for, 200. So the expect statement checks that the response status which is returned by the API is to be 200. If it is not 200, then it will throw an error and eventually the test will fail. So this is the test that we want to run. There is a, and we can use the keyword dot only after the test. So it runs the particular test only which we want to run. and we can run the command npx playwright test. Once we run the test, you can see that running one test using one worker, one test passed, and it also prints the command that can be used to check the report. So let's check the report npx playwright show hyphen report. And the report will be by default generated in the default browser. You can see get order details API test with status code check, and it shows the steps also that were run. It executed this get API slash get order and verified that the status code to be 200, and everything has a green check mark here which indicates that the test ran successfully. You can also verify this shows that one test passed and it ran on the Chromium browser, using the Chromium browser. So this is how we can send a get request. This is the basic get request that we sent. Now let's move further and verify the other test. So let me first remove the only from here, because again it will execute the same test only. The second test that we will be running is to verify the get. Again we will be calling the same get API, but here we will pass another parameter, the ID of the order which does not exist in the system, and here we need to verify that it should return the status code 404. Everything remains the same, only the parameter and the status code changes. So let me quickly run this test by using dot only. Remember, there was first test that we ran. I have already removed the only from the first test and have passed it to the second test. So now I expect this test only to run. We can see one test passed successfully. Let's quickly run the report and verify. Now we can see the second test running successfully, and we can see it in the report get order details API test with status code 404. This also shows all of the steps with a green tick, which means that the test was passed successfully. So this is how you can perform the status code checks. The next test is with multiple parameters. How do I pass multiple parameters to a get request? So there might be a scenario where you want to verify multiple parameters, a combination of parameters in the get API, and every parameter, like for example, you need to filter the records and pull those respective records based on different parameters that are available for the get API. Like in this API, there are three different query parameters. The first one is the order ID, the user ID, and product ID. So if I want to filter the records based on different query parameters and want to verify that whatever value I supply in these parameters, it actually fetches those respective records or not. So this is how we pass on the different parameters. What we will do is we will pass a object of parameters, and these are all the details that are already available in the Swagger. This is the name of this parameter is ID. The second is user ID. The third is the product ID. The ID is an integer, user ID is a string, and product ID is a string. That is the reason why we can update these records as well. So the ID is 1, user ID is 1, and product ID is 1. The reason I have quoted this because it needs to be in string format. As we can see in the documentation, it is a string. And then the other part remains the same. The only thing change here is in the previous test, if you see, we posted the object of parameters with the details, but here I have separated this parameter and I'll be passing this value variable here, and the same expectation will run. So let me just run this test only, and we can see one test passed successfully. Let's open the report to check the test. So we can see the test name, get order details API test with multiple params. Fine. Everything has a green check mark, which means this test also passed successfully. So this is how you pass multiple parameters in the get request. The other question arises is how do I pass on the headers in the request? So there might be possibility you need to pass on some cookie or maybe content type or some extra headers that is required by your API. And then only we can run that particular get test. So this is how we pass on the different headers. So what we need to do is const response equal to request.get, then the get URL. After that, if you want to pass, you can pass on the parameters. And then in the same object where you pass on the options, you can pass the headers option and create an object for that. And in that object, we can pass the content type application/JSON. Now this I am doing because if you see here, it already accepts the application JSON. It automatically accepts that. But if I want, I can also pass this parameter in the header using the headers option here. Once you pass on the option and again you run the test, you'll get the same details. And then let's run this test only. It shows test passed successfully. Let's open the report. We can see the test passing successfully with all the details. Let me run this test with some invalid parameter. Let me pass the ID as 2. We all know that the order ID that we are working with is 1. There is no order available in the system with the order ID 2. So let me pass the order ID 2 and user ID 1. Here, I would expect this test to fail because there is no such order which has a order ID 2 and user ID 1. So let me quickly run this test and you should see a failure. Yeah, the report comes up successfully and we see that the expected was 200 status code, but it received 404, which means this particular test was run successfully, and it failed because the parameters that we passed did not fetch any records, and it's a failure. So maybe we can correct it again. Let me pass the order ID 1 and user ID 1, which actually matches, and it will bring out the fetch the required records. And we can see it shows one test pass with the correct parameters. Let me open the report. And again, it comes back as green, which means the test passed successfully. The next test we will work out with is timeout. Playwright allows us to set the parameter for timeout also while sending the get request. The timeout parameter sets the maximum wait time of 300 milliseconds. You can see I have set it as 300 milliseconds for the get request to complete. If the API does not respond within 300 milliseconds, Playwright fails the request and throws a timeout error. This helps in preventing tests from hanging and makes failure faster and more predictable, especially for slow or unstable APIs. You can see this is just a parameter that I have added option for timeout with 300 milliseconds. Let me quickly run the test to see. And we will also run the test again with the lesser timeout time. So we can see the error actually coming up. npx playwright test and show report. Get order details with API test with timeout. The test passed successfully and we can see it took 39 milliseconds to run. So maybe we can lesser this to like 10 milliseconds, the timeout, and then again run the test. I would expect this to fail and throw the timeout error. You can see you can see it throws the timeout error here. API request get timeout 10 milliseconds exceeded. This is the timeout error that is been thrown by Playwright, and it took 19 milliseconds to actually send the request. Because we supplied 10 milliseconds, the timeout exceeded and this test failed. So that means this timeout is really helpful in identifying the slower test and failing the test on the timeout option itself. Another option that Playwright provides us with is the failOnStatusCode. And this status code tells Playwright to automatically fail the request if the API responds with a non-200. Non-200 means not 200, but 2xx. That refers to from 200 to 299. Any code that goes beyond this. Okay. For example, if the API shows 404, 400, 503, 510, 510, 408, anything that is beyond 200 to 299. So the test will fail. This is important because we can directly put up this parameter or option in the get request itself, and instead of manually checking the response.status, Playwright will throw an error immediately, making the test cleaner and stricter. And this is useful when a request must succeed for the test to continue. For example, in the later test, I'll just give an example. I'll explain this further as well. You want to verify different fields, or the structure check or data verification in the response, right? But before we verify that, we need to make sure that our test should succeed with the 200 status code. That is, the get API is actually working before we verify the data. This fail on status code will help us provide with the required status checks. So here we need not pass on the expect statement to check the status code. That will be done internally by fail on status code option. So let me quickly run this. And I have intentionally changed this user ID to 6, for which there is no record available. So instead of providing it with the correct data, I have provided an invalid data. So I'm expecting this test to fail, and let's see what error that it throws. So we see an API request context.get 404 not found. This is the name that I had given to the test. Get order details API test with fail on status code. Fine. And this is the get method that was called. And in this method itself, we called the fail on status code option. This shows that the get API was expecting 200 or 200, beyond that 200 to 299 status code, but instead we got a response text with 404 status code. The text was no order found with the given parameters. So this is how this fail on status code helps us with quick checking of the test assertions for the status code. Let me change this to the valid one, user ID 1, and again run the test. You can see after passing the parameters correctly for the user ID 1, the record was available, and fail on status code verified the status code to be 200, and the test was passed. You can see the test getting passed successfully. We see the green check mark coming up successfully. We learned about sending the get API request with Playwright TypeScript using single or multiple parameters, with headers, with timeout, using fail on status code. Now let's verify the response data. And there are multiple ways in which we can verify the response data, which we will check out shortly. So the first verification we will perform is to check the structure of the record that we get in the response. Fine. If you just check the get API, it shows the response body is an object which has a message field. Its value is order found, and then it has an order array which has a different objects. So there is only a single order currently available in the system. If there are multiple orders, it will show one by one in a array. Different objects will be shown in the array. So this is how we can perform the structure check. We can just, you can see this, the existing part that we just checked in the basic request. It remains the same, like await request.get the URL and then the parameters user ID 1 and fail on status code true. There is no expect statement written to verify the 200 status code, because fail on status code will perform the required checks for the status code. After that, we can extract the response, the response body. In this response body variable, using response.json, whatever response we get, we'll convert it to JSON and then store it in the variable response body. After that, we will run the first expectation. The first expectation says, like, we want this object to have a property called message, the outer side. Then we want the response body to have a orders property as well. The orders object should have an property of ID, and it should also have an product name property as well. So this is the basic structure check. If you want, you can write the names of the different field names that are available in the response ID, user ID, product amount, and so on. And you can verify to have a property. Then you can see I have given the object actual location as well. The order's first object, the array starts with 0. So this is the first object. If there are multiple objects also, you can verify. But ideally, I think if you just verify one object, the rest of the objects remains the same. So ideally, you will have the same output for the other objects as well. That is the reason why I'm just verifying the only two fields here in the first object. But if you want, you can verify all of the fields also. It all depends upon how you want to perform the verification. So let me run this test. And you can see the get order API was hit, and then the expectations ran successfully. It ran to check the response body has a property message, orders, and then the third one has a product name, and then the ID, and then the product name. And every check went successful. The next part is to verify the data, response data. If you see this part always remains the same, like I'm hitting the get request and extracting the response body. After that, I'm just verifying that the response body has a field called message. It should be order found, like we see in the Swagger here. It shows order found. So to verify that, we will write the expectation as response body dot message. Response body refers to this variable where we extracted the response and stored it in a JSON, and in the variable name response body. And response body should have a field called message, which should be equal to, which should be like order found. Then the next verification is to verify that we have an order array. It should be an array, not an object, right? We can verify that by using this expectation array dot is array response body dot orders. So whatever data you have in the response body, it should have a orders field, and that should be an array to be truthy. That means that should be true, that order should be an array. The next is, and that order length should be greater than 1. Ideally, if we have some orders already available, I'm verifying the data. Before I verify the data, I should be able to make sure that it contains some data in it. So that is what I'm doing here. I'm verifying that the order's length, the array of the orders, is greater than 0. That means it has some data in it. This is how we perform the basic level verification before I get into the deeper verification, data verification part. Let's combine the test and the show report. So as soon as the test runs, we will see the report also getting generated upfront. And we can see the basic verification test also passed. The response body has a message text that was order found, and then the order array is an array, and then the length of the order is greater than 0. So this is how the basic level verification passed. How do I verify the order details? So after extracting the order, now let me remind you that this order details that we fetch in the get request is an object. Inside that object, there is one field called message, and there is an order array. So this order has an object. The first object has the order details. So to extract these details, what we will do is we will fetch the response body and the first order object. This is how we write it, response body dot order 0. And after that, we will just verify that the object has a field called ID that should not be null. The order ID field should be defined. That means it should have some value. The user ID should be 1, should be equal to 1. Product ID should be equal to 79, and product name should be equal to 5 star 10 GM Chocobar. Fine. This is how we perform the data verification. I have not kept the first field message order found because we already performed that kind of verification in the previous text. If you want, you can move that to the next test as well. But I found like it would be duplicate. So that is the reason why I'm just verifying the order object here. So this is how you perform the verification for the respective integer fields. Like you should not be a null, and it should have some value defined. And then to equal actually verifies the equality, like it should be this value, right? It should be equal to 1, it should be equal to 79, and product name to equal 5-star 10-gram chocobar. Let me quickly run this, and we can see the expectations coming up successful. The get order API was hit successful, and then the different to be null, not to be null. You can see that there is a not here, not to be null. There should be some value in it. To be defined, to equal, 3 checks for to equal. All of them are successfully passing. That means the data is appearing correctly. Playwright also offers another verification method that can be used using matching object and array. Let's check that as well. Like I said, the order details that we fetch in the get API, it's an object, it's a JSON object. Fine. So we expect the response body to match object. What object? It should be have a message field, and it should be an order field. There should be two fields in it. The message field should have the value order found. Orders should be an array. We expect that an array should contain an object, and these are the different object details that we want to verify. Containing means you need not put on all the values in it. You can just verify the required fields that you want to verify. Like I have just added the product ID, product name, quantity, text amount. I have not included the ID and the user ID here. Fine. Then also it will do the respective matching for us and verify if it's fine or not. I have updated it to only, so only this test will run. So let me quickly run this test and see the report. This is much easier as compared to the extracting and verifying the values one by one. You can verify the values, whatever value you want to match this object. Now, one more thing, let's do some invalid testing as well, like update the product ID to 80, which is not correct. So I expect this test to fail now. Let's run it again. And you can see this is how the details are shown. The product ID, we expected it as to be 80, but actual ID is 79. Fine. This is where it points out the things. We did not provide the user ID, so it's showing that as well. The user ID is 1 and product ID is 79. But our major focus is on the product ID, which should be 79, not 80. This is where the test fails. So let me change it again to 79 and rerun the test. And this time the test passed successfully. Maybe I can also change this order found to order founds just to check the working of this object matching thing. And you can see it clearly points out we expected order founds, but the message is order found. So this is how we can perform the matching object and array verification as well with Playwright while performing the get API request test. The other part is to verify and matching the object. How do we do that? So it's the same thing. Ideally, we verified the whole of the object, like it has a field and then it has an array. The first one is an object. Inside that there is an array and so on. But if you just want to verify an object, particular object, this is how you can perform that. Like you just need to extract the object that you want to verify, and after that you run the expectation that you want to verify. You can have the required fields that you want to verify, and it will perform the requested testing for you. So let me change this only to the matching object. So we have this get order and verify matching object test running successfully here. Get order and verify matching object. This is the only test that we wanted to run, and it passed successfully. What happens if I change it to some other invalid values, like for example, order ID 2? Let me change everything. 6.5. So the whole of this value that I've supplied is wrong, because I'm expecting for user ID 1, I'm expecting user ID 3 to be in the response, which is not available, which is actually wrong. So I'm intentionally failing this test now. And you can see it got these three values: ID2, product name, total amount, and user ID. This is the expected value that is printed in the green, but the actual values that we got from the API is what is printed in the red. That is, the ID is 1, so it fails. Product name is Chocobar, 5-star 10-gram Chocobar. Total amount 5.5, user ID 1. So everything that it wanted to match does not match, and it failed. Let me change it back to the normal, the correct values. So we see the test passing again. And this time we see every check getting passed, the green checks coming up here, and one passed printed successfully. Now we learned about different ways to verify the data in the GET request. We learned how to perform a basic structure check, basic level verification. Uh, we learned how to perform the matching of object and array of a single matching object as well. Let's talk about the best practice. How do you actually write the test using the best practices? So I would recommend using extracting the response body and then verifying the field. If you want to verify the field, you can write this assertion to expect the message to be whatever message that you want. Then the orders length, if you are verifying the array, you first verify that the length is greater than 0. If the array length is already 0 and you have written the expectations to match the different array objects details, then it doesn't make any sense, because as the array is not only getting generated successfully, so writing the other test may get into the failures. So it's better to just first verify at a basic level. It will help you in fail fast scenarios. The test will quickly fail before you going into the deeper validations. And once the length is found to be greater than 0, this check passes, then you can perform the actual verification, like the array containing an object which should be 1 and the product name should be so and so. So this is how you write the test with the best practices. As I have already used the fail on status code with true, I have not used the status code check expectation here. Otherwise, if you don't use this fail on status code option, you can directly use the expect response body dot status to be 200 or 204, 201, 404, whatever status code that you want to verify. Let me quickly run this test as well. So we have the verification done correctly with the best practices also. And you can see the test with the using the best practices also passes successfully. Get order details API test with best practice, and it hits the get API, verifies the message field to be order found. The array should be greater than 0, and then it performs verification for the object in the array. There are situations where we need to extract some of the data from the get request or any request that you are working with and use it in the further test. So to extract the data, we ideally need to assign it to some variable and use the respective variables to print that data or use that variable in the further test. Now, how do we perform the extraction? So it's basically very simple. We have been performing the extraction a lot in all of the tests previously that we ran. We are using this response body variable and extracting the response as a JSON using response.json method. Now, if I want to, this is the same test that I have copy pasted from the best practice, right? Message to be order found greater than array's length to be greater than 0, then the object contains an array, and then array contains an object. And after that, from the first order, I want to verify that the order ID is not null, and then the order ID variable is declared where I assign this value order.id, whatever value is available in order.id in the object, in the first object of the order, that should be extracted to this order ID variable. And then I am printing this variable value in the log, console log. You can see the test getting passed successfully. This is the std out, the order ID that is printed here, and the order ID is also printed in the console log. This is one. This is the order ID. If you want to print, say for example, product name, we can write it as order dot product name and then console dot log product underscore name. And once I run the test, it will log the product name as well. You can see the product name is printed. Here also we can see the product name coming up. Let's learn about attaching response data to the Playwright report. While generating the report in the previous test, you might have observed that most of the data that we see are only the steps in the report. We do not see any response data or the required data, output data that the GET API fetched from the server. We are not able to see that in the report. So if you want to see that in the report, how do you attach those data in the report so that can be verified all at once as soon as the report is generated? In this test, we will get the order details API, verify, perform a basic verification, and then attach the response to the report. So how do we do that? We will make use of this test info parameter that provides metadata and utilities for the current test. It is used here to attach data to the test report. For the data that we need to attach, these are the data that we need to extract. So the following lines, like the status text, headers, and body, it extracts the response metadata. So this line extracts the status code. The status text is extracted using this response.status text. The response headers are extracted here, and then the response body. The const full response, this object, it combines all the response details and creates a single object that contains status code, status text, headers, and response body. The test info.attach adds an attachment to the Playwright report. It has two parameters. The first one is the name, and the second one is the body that we want to attach with the required parameters like content type, what kind of content type it should be, and so on. So full API response is the name of the attachment that will be shown in the Playwright report. And the second part, the body, JSON.stringify, full response, comma null, comma 2, this part, the body of the attachment. It has three arguments, full response, null, and 2. So this particular line converts the object into a readable, pretty formatted JSON. The first argument is the object that we want to convert. So we want to convert this full response object. And the second object, null, is the replacer, which means it will ask this method to include the body as it is without making any changes to it or modifying any values. So as it is, whatever value we get for status text, headers, and body, it should be included in the attachment. The third one, 2, this object controls the pretty printing, that is the readability part. 2 means indent nested JSON by 2 spaces. And the content type ensures that the report treats the attachment as a JSON. So once you run this test, it will execute and hit the get API first with the parameter user ID 1, and then expect that the status code should be 200. It will extract the status text, headers, body, and then generate an object for full response, and that object will be ultimately attached to the report. So let me quickly run this test and see the attachment. This kind of attachment is very helpful to let the team know how the test executed and what data was shown in the response. Maybe this would help in kind of failures as well to verify or debug the failures. Now you see the full response coming up. The status code is 200, status text is okay, headers, and the body. So this is the full body that is generated in the response. In the earlier reports, we were not able to verify what data was returned from the server in the response data ideally. We were just able to verify that the API hit successfully and it was working fine with the respective request parameters that we sent. But this gives us a full visibility around the response data as well with the status code, status text, headers, as well as the body. This is all how you perform API testing with Playwright TypeScript. In this tutorial, we learned about hitting the get API request and also performing verification, validations of the response data, and also attaching the response data to the Playwright report. I will be posting another video where we will be talking about the post API request using Playwright TypeScript. So stay tuned to my channel, like, subscribe, and follow for more details. Thank you.